Good morning, everybody. My name is Rose Schaffhauser, and for those of you I have not had the pleasure to meet yet, I'm the Executive Director for MAMES. And this morning, we're extremely excited to offer you the first of 3 webinars to help you improve your collection workflow in 2019. Our MAMES associate member and spring convention sponsor, Allegiance Group, will present this series with best practices on how to create a collections policy, a collection culture within your company, and accessible call center or CSR teams. With our collections obviously having to be a top priority to combat our shrinking margins, this is an opportunity for you and your staff to understand the how-tos to effectively and efficiently building a sustainable collections program. Today, we are pleased to offer the first in the webinar series, Collection Policy Workshop. So without further ado, I'm pleased to turn this presentation over to Allegiance Group with Bruce Gearing. Bruce, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Rose, and welcome everybody. I hope everybody is enjoying this nice frigid temperature right now that I think we're at -5 right now, which I'm sure is a lot better than some of you. So, but thank you for your time this morning. And as Rose mentioned, this is going to be the first in a series of 3 collection workshops. And today we're going to talk about the Collection Policy Bootcamp, and then we'll talk next time about the establishment of a collection culture, and then we'll wrap up with the creating a successful call center and CSR team. So for the agenda today, we're going to start with, why should we even create a collection policy? And then take a look at where do we start and what are the 6 key components that every collection policy should have. And then we'll talk about the best practices that you can use to establish this. And then we'll lead into the next session on how to build my new collection culture. So let's start by asking the question, why should my company have a collection policy? And I know I'm speaking to the choir when I say in today's environment, margins in our industry are narrower than ever. And Rose mentioned that at the beginning of this. Tightening margins means we really can't afford to allow payments to fall through the cracks. So what can we do to close those gaps? And that really starts with establishing a written collection policy. And a policy is going to serve as your company's rule book for all the procedures, starting from the time an order is received until a balance is paid. And I would make a safe bet here that probably one of your goals this year is to increase your patient pay collections. In order to improve your collections, you need to know where to start. So to kick this off, we want to talk about overall collection percentages that you're experiencing today. And there's a poll question that has just been launched. And if you could respond to this, and we'll share these results, this will give us a starting place of, what we're looking at wanting to achieve in improving, that one goal, overall collections. And just take a couple of minutes to look at this. But in determining your overall collection percentage, I think we'll find that everybody probably can improve. So Sharon, with that, do we have responses from everybody?
We do, and I'll go ahead and share those. It looks like 8% say that they are collecting less than 50%. 25% are collecting between 50 and 64%. 33% are collecting 65 to 79%. 25% are collecting 80 to 89%, and 8% are collecting more than 90%.
Very good. And that's, this, and I'll tell you, our association in general, just in my experience in being able to meet with a lot of DMEs across the country, is probably better than average. I mean, if you look at industry averages, in patient collections alone, the average for the industry is less than 50%, believe it or not. So comparing to that number, we're above average. But let's be realistic. I mean, if the overall recovery that you're experiencing now is less than 80 or 90%, you can benefit from having, revenue cycle management processes evaluated, and even look perhaps for assistance from outside experts to aid in the evaluation of your operational efficiency, or even assist with your billing and collection processes. But in the evaluation process, you'll be able to identify where you may need some help. So moving on, let's take a look at that healthy AR range. And as I mentioned, I mean, this is where we take a look at what should you be experiencing. And the reality is that you would love to have, 50% of your AR in that current category. If you see your AR outstanding beyond 90 days, the likelihood of recovery, again, by industry standards, is less than 40%. So you really want to look at basic metrics of saying, if you can get your current AR above 50%, that's really good. And if you do that and you have you're over 90, less than 20%, if you have those two statistics, you're probably going to be in that DSO range of about 50-ish days, 55 days DSO, roughly. And, if you're struggling to hit those numbers, your collection policy will help you begin to understand how to truly get better. So why have a collection policy? I mean, documenting procedures drives results. By taking the time to outline your workflow, the policy will serve as the compass for your collection efforts and help ensure consistent approach throughout your operation. And then next, you want to clarify roles. And clarifying roles by assigning employees specific tasks and objectives in the workflow, you'll streamline the process and improve your staff's efficiency and accountability. Providing consistency is key. The policy should guide every employee to make the same decision in the same scenario, which will eliminate confusion, help reach your collection goals, certainly improve customer satisfaction. And if you train and abide by the policy and rules, you'll have peace of mind knowing that every balance is being treated the same way. Then track the progress. By documenting your workflow, you can identify, key performance indicators, and those KPIs, such as, days sales outstanding or collection rates or employee efficiency, will help you determine if your policy is generating the expected results. And if not, adjust your workflow and your policy to consider, changing those tasks, assignments, timing. After the changes are implemented, assess the impact of those results. So it's continuous. It's not something you set and let it go. You have to track the progress. And policies are going to differ from, DME provider to provider, because many of you handle a lot of, direct business. And in those cases, you have the opportunity to capture more upfront credit information, et cetera, versus somebody that may be receiving a lot of referrals for infusion services or something like that, where you're not meeting face to face. And that's an opportunity to take a look at how that needs to be written into your collection policy. So let's take a look at the difference between a collection policy and collection procedures. A collection policy defines the mission and the rules you want your employees to follow to reach your company's goals. It guides employees on how to handle patient accounts, and it outlines your approach to balancing getting paid with customer satisfaction. Policies will differ from provider to provider, as indicated earlier, with that example of direct contact with the patient face-to-face versus, handling referrals. Procedures, collection procedures detail the patient invoice workflow, starting from the referral and ends with the balance being paid in full or being written off as bad debt. When creating and reviewing your workflow, you and your team can have a very healthy discussion on how you want to handle patient balances throughout the process, and that's key to this. And here are some questions that you will want to consider as you're outlining that workflow. So, what key components should every collection policy have? Your collection policy is the set of procedures your company will implement to help ensure equal treatment of patient accounts. By explaining the basics, the who, what, when, where, and how of your collection process, you'll be certain to cover the basics of your policy. So here are the 6 key components of your collection policy. Let's use the SMART method when we're doing this. And I think that's really easy to remember when setting your goals, because you've got to make your goals specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and certainly time-bound. So you can monitor and really look at what results you're achieving over time. So in setting this up, you've got to start with, what do you want your collectors to accomplish? What are your collection goals? Are you going to track the number of calls or track recovery? What are the key KPIs that are important to your operation that you need to measure here? And how will those goals be measured? We recommend tracking goals on a monthly, quarterly, and annual basis, because what you want to watch are the trends. And are they moving up or down, and what's impacting those? That's how you're going to be able to determine how quickly you can impact and adjust if necessary. What collection procedures should be followed? We cover this. We're going to cover this, a little bit more detail going forward in this presentation. Who's going to resolve disputes? Asking, who you have managing these issues. Do you have a resolution specialist to handle the questions, research the accounts, and determine how much, if any, should be adjusted, etc.? And when will you write off an account? That's important. Set guidelines to determine when balances are uncollectible. You don't want to waste time and money going after bad debt. That's just, you're losing more and more money. And will you send accounts to an outside agency or report to the credit bureau? Those types of things have to be determined. So again, you have consistent procedures that everybody will follow consistently. And where are the accounts going to be handled? Many companies start by handling the accounts in-house, but eventually you may need help. You may need a partner that's going to have expertise in those areas where you have difficult accounts to handle, and you may not have the expertise internally to manage that. And that's another decision that needs to be made. So where do you start? So I'm going to turn this over to Sharon so she can start through the workflow process with you. Sharon?
Okay. Thanks, Bruce. Excuse me. We're going to give you some tools to help you get started. The first thing that we're going to share with you is an example of a patient invoice workflow and a collection policy template. We'll send these to you after the presentation. So as Bruce mentioned, every policy is going to be different because each company is unique. You may all be in the healthcare industry, but your company has its own culture, mission, vision, and values which are going to influence your policy. We recommend you start by outlining your patient invoice workflow. Begin with the referral and end with the balance being paid in full or written off. And as Bruce mentioned, this is really an ideal opportunity for you to work with your collectors and your team to get the processes and the policies that you want used throughout the process. Okay, so here's an example of a patient invoice workflow. We've outlined the process from, as I mentioned, from the time you get the order until the time the balance is paid in full or written off. And if you're not familiar with the workflow, each of the symbols represent a step in the process. The squares indicate action items. The diamonds represent a place where a decision is going to be made. And in this case, the endpoint is represented by the dollar sign and hopefully collecting our cash. This particular process looks a little more complicated than usual because we've added some red clouds to represent some of the questions that could be asked at different steps along the workflow. And these are not all inclusive questions, but these are just some ideas to help get you started. And then you'll be using the answers to these questions as the basis of your collection policy. So for discussion purposes, we're going to break this workflow down into 4 main processes. First, we'll look at intake, then we'll look at payment options, we'll look at patient communication, and non-payment. So let's start with the patient intake, which is in the upper right-hand corner. For our example, we've defined patient intake as the time you and your patient exchange the information you need to process the order. And we've kind of broken it down into these 4 steps. You receive the order, you collect the insurance and payment information, you process the insurance and estimate the patient balance, and then you're going to send out a statement or give your patient a receipt. Okay, so here are just some of the questions, since I know that diagram that we gave you is a little small. Here are some of the questions that are from that diagram. You'll want to make sure when you're putting together your policy, you keep your answers at a higher level. Because remember, as Bruce mentioned, you will have your procedures, which will go into more detail about how you want to have each step handled. But in this step, you're really trying to ensure that you're going to collect all the documentation you need to process the claim the first time. You probably have a checklist of what you want to collect, the approvals that you need. Maybe you're using multiple systems and you'll want to identify which system the information is going to go into so that people are clear. And then you want to try to automate as many tasks as possible. And when we're taking a look at patient intake, what you're really trying to do is determine what is the patient's responsibility. As patients are, and healthcare is becoming more consumer driven, you're hearing more and more about pricing transparency. And this key to get the patient to accept the responsibility for their portion of the outstanding balance. And so what you want to be able to do is explain to them what their balance is and have them say that they are responsible for that. Maybe you have a form for them to sign. And if you do, where do you file it? Where do you store it? And then before the patient leaves, you'll kind of want to outline the next steps as to what's going to happen in the collection process so the patient understands. And Bruce will kind of take over into what kind of payment options you can offer.
And thanks, Sharon. And that's key. As Sharon mentioned, in intake and the demographic information you're collecting from your patient is critical. And understanding what the eligibility is and what they are going to be responsible for allows you then to determine what payment options are going to be available to the patient. And what are those? So you want to take a look at, what those options might be. So payment options really consist of a number of tools. I mean, do you have a way for patients to pay online? And prior to that, what payment options are you going to accept for different services that are being offered? Do you have, based on the service that you're providing, a payment plan option? Or is there going to be a way for them to go ahead and pay automatically for reoccurring or resupply, so that you don't have to be tracking down these payments or chasing the patient for payment down the road? So understanding, making it easier for the patient to pay, or making it as easy as possible for the patient to pay, is critical. So capturing the information up front is something that you're hearing and you've heard for a number of years, but really it's coming home to really pay, benefits if you're able to implement as part of your policy processes and train your staff to make sure that they're getting, payment secured for the service being provided. And, that really includes, making decisions. Are you going to accept, credit cards? Are you going to be able to allow patients to pay online? Do you have, set up e-checks for, debits to their bank account or savings account, etc. And doing it in a way that is going to allow the patient to not feel like they're being forced to pay outside of maybe what they can afford in their household budget. I mean, do we align the payments with their pay cycle if they're working? So you can align the payments with their payroll deposits or their Social Security deposit, so that that's not going to stress them, that they'll always have money to pay their bills. Your policy will outline the procedure you want your employees to take if a patient cannot pay in full or on time. If your company charges a late fee, or there's a return check fee, all those things have to be considered in your policy, so that again everybody's is consistently managed. And what is the authority you give your employees to waive those fees or reduce the balance as an option for getting the patient to pay or bring their account current? And that's critical. We even have some customers that are incenting people to pay faster by going ahead and having an upfront deduction if they pay by a certain date. Those are all options. Now, granted, I don't attest that we want to leave money on the table, but there are circumstances that might be a benefit. So once you've looked at that and you've established what those payment options are, now next you got to look at patient communication. And there's a lot of communication between you and the patient if they don't pay, or they possibly are setting up payment terms. So you want to look at what that consists of. If you're offering, just statements going out the door, or are there electronic options? Again, going back to automation, technology, and getting the message and the communication to the patient the way they want to receive that is critical. The easier we make it for the patient to pay, the quicker they'll pay, and the more likely they're going to stay current with you. So offering options are critical. So looking at those opportunities or those options within your own software systems, etc., are very important. And then taking a look at what's the timing of everything. When will you send the first statement? And what is the communication on the information going to the patient? We all hear horror stories from people that just are so confused when they get their EOB and, this is not a bill, but then when they finally get the bill, they're just as confused. Trying to make that as streamlined as possible is going to help the process along. The frequency of communication. What's the follow-up going to be? Are you going to have somebody on your staff reach out to patients after a certain amount of time? What makes the most sense? Can you text? Those are important options. And when are you going to be available to take, patient calls? Those things are, again, critical to, customer service and their satisfaction, as much as making sure that you're getting your recovery in a timely manner. So our next survey question deals with this. If you could text your patients, what would you want to communicate to them? And in this case, we want you to check all of the options here that might apply. That's something that we want to make sure that we take advantage of. Using technology is critical for statements, reminder calls, even the early out process, email and texting are all part of it. So making it easier for the patient to pay is critical. Sharon, do we have results on the survey question?
It looks like people are still voting, so let's give them a little bit more time.
Yeah, and again, just any of these that apply, and it'll weight the importance once it's tabulated. But clearly, we hear requests for this, and if we can make people aware of their bill and to pay, I know I get a note from AT&T every month letting me know my bill's available, and it tells me when it's been taken out of my bank account. So I think this is just the way of the future. We need to think of better ways to secure our payments and make it easier for our patients to pay. Okay.
It looks like everyone has voted, and so here are the results. 93% would be interested in texting a payment due date. 67% would be interested in requesting payments, and 67% would be interested in sharing payment receipts and statement availability, and then 60% would like renewal reminders.
Good. I think this just really shows the importance of communication and staying up with technology to try to make it easier for patients to pay. Lastly, how are you going to handle people that don't pay? Because there's always going to be this issue. And you need to make sure that you're doing this aligned with your mission. And that's really critical. Now, if the patient doesn't pay, the wording in your collection call, the letters will probably get stronger as the account ages. That's very typical. But you want to make sure that any communication at this point stays within the guidelines set by national and state laws, such as, Fair Debt Collection Practice Act, Telephone Consumer Protection Act. These laws, certainly prohibit abusive, unfair, and deceptive practices when collecting medical debts. And a lot of people aren't comfortable with this because they don't have that familiarity with those laws or statutes. So here's where certainly I would recommend reaching out, if you do not have that expertise internally, to make sure that whatever policy you have in place, and if you've decided to pursue accounts, after they've been written off through collection practices, you want to make sure that your guidelines, your policies, and procedures are following all those appropriate, statutes and laws. When you look at non-payment, again, some of the questions you ask, are you going to give them a second chance? Will you turn over to the collection agent? So you report to credit bureau? When do you write off the account? what we see time and time again is people continue to keep accounts on their books way longer than they should. If somebody hasn't paid you within 90 days, the likelihood of them paying is, like we mentioned at the very beginning, it's unlikely. It reduces below 40%. And if it gets beyond 120, 150, 180 days, the likelihood exponentially drops. So you don't want to waste a bunch of time and effort going after that. So if you've written it off, what are you going to do with that balance? And some of that comes down to, what is it? Maybe you're looking at just trying to recover the equipment if they're not going to pay. Those are all things that you need to consider within your policy and procedure. So, having discussed all of this, what best practices can you use? I'll turn this back to Sharon so she can go through some of the best practices.
Well, collection policies have been around for some time, so you'll definitely want to take advantage of what others have learned. So let's just take a look at some of the best practices. As you're trying to establish your goals and what you're hoping to accomplish, you'll want to use industry benchmarks, especially if you don't have your own. We recommend that your company start benchmarking so you know what kind of results you'll get for your client base in your area. But if you haven't done much benchmarking, you can always go to some of the sources like HME News or AA Home Care, because they put out a collection KPI benchmarks that you can use as a starting point. Okay, next, and we talked about the healthy AR ranges at the beginning. And this is where you're tracking, there's such a thing called an aging report where you can get a list of unpaid patient invoices by date ranges. And a lot of collection agencies, this is what they use to track how long the accounts have been overdue, and they use it as a measure to determine the effectiveness of the credit and collection functions. And your days in account receivable, as Bruce mentioned, refers to the average number of days it takes to collect the payments that are due. The lower the number, the faster you're obtaining the payment on an average. So your days in AR should stay below the 50%, 50 days. And as you can see, on this chart, that 50% on average are less than 30 days. So 30 to 40 days is preferable, but if you can stay in that range, you'll do a better job of getting your cash recovered. Okay, next is draft scripts for your collection calls. We know that every collection call is different, and the only way your collectors will learn how to ask for an outstanding balance is practice. I've done collection calls. They are not always fun. So by drafting scripts, especially for your newer collectors, you can help them learn the proper way to reach out to your patients and help them get started by providing a list of questions as they proceed through the call, to make sure they, are asking everything they need to ask. And before they even get on the phone, as part of your training, you want to do some role playing so they can get comfortable with asking the questions and responding to the answers that they may get. We will be sharing a draft script as a handout when we go through the CSR webinar, which is the last webinar in the series. Just like with calls, you're going to get a lot of questions from patients through email. And so by creating email templates, it will help you ensure consistent responses. It'll help save your staff time, and it'll reduce errors. You can have wording in the content you want to use in a Word document. Your collectors can copy and paste it into an email, and they can fill in the blanks, and it's off it goes. And will probably have several templates that they can probably use. One for confirming payment plans, if you get a return check, what to do if a patient passes away. There's just a variety of scenarios. So just keep in mind, as you are putting together your policy, the more of these scenarios you can address and come up with some kind of response in your procedures, the better off you'll be. And when your collectors and customer service reps are on the phone, they need to have easy access to patient records, statements, payments that have been made, and other communications in order to answer the questions. So in your policy, you want to make sure that your reps have the access they need in the different systems, so they can be able to help your patients answer their questions. And then what kind of patient access are your patients going to have? Are they going to be able to do some self-service through a payment portal or through another system? More and more patients are getting very comfortable with using portals to make payments, and they like being able to change their address because they don't always want to take the time to be on hold. So if you don't have a way for your patients to help themselves, that should be something you might want to consider. And as Bruce mentioned, and we just think that this is really important, monitoring your trends on a regular basis. Because when you have to understand where you are, and if your policy isn't generating the results that you're expecting, you need to take a look at it and make adjustments. And once again, you can change the task, you can change the timing. There's lots of things you can tweak to help improve your results. By having the process documented, it'll make it easier for you to determine what you're doing. You'll know what your collectors are doing, and you can easily make changes. And then lastly, these are just kind of more general tips. We will be giving you a template to help you formulate your collection policy. This is just a basic template. You can have your answers be as simple or as complicated as you wanted, but at least it'll get you started. Being in marketing, I always find it's easier to have something to work with and make adjustments than starting from a blank sheet of paper. So by supplying the template and the workflow, we're hoping to give you a place to get started. When you're putting your answers together, remember that you're talking to your staff, and you want to have your answers be clear, you want them to be concise, and you want them to be easy to understand. And when you're putting your policy together, you'll want to make sure that they have consider how much authority you are going to give them. You don't want to have them have to transfer a call to a manager to get a discount if the discount is in your collection policy. It should just be, if you're going to offer a discount, they should be able to offer the discount so the person isn't passed from department to department. And lastly, we recommend talking to your accountant. They know your business. So they could probably help identify some topics that are unique to your business that you may want to address, that you may have overlooked, or, it's always good to have a team to help you out and bounce ideas off of as you're implementing some of these policies and procedures. So use your resources. Remember that by creating your collection policy, you are being proactive in trying to improve your cash recovery. So, and then as the last step, since we're talking about the policy, you'll need to go back and review your collection procedures and make sure that they are in alignment, because you don't want your policy to be saying one thing and then your procedures contradicting what you're telling them to do in the policy, or what your mission, going against your mission.
Okay. Thanks, Sharon. And so now we've discussed, the policy and creating the policy and what should go into it. So now let's assume you've created your policy. So now what? And this leads into our next session, but it's really establishing your collection culture, setting your goals, training your staff, educating your patients, and evaluating your capacity. And this is really important. So we'll go into this in much more detail in the next session. And if you haven't already signed up for it, the next two sessions are actually on the screen here. So we will certainly look forward to having you join us for the next two sessions. And to conclude this session, we want to make sure that in the invitation that you received, you have the PDFs that you can download that Sharon mentioned. And we're here to answer any questions that you have regarding this presentation today, or if there are follow-up questions we can assist you with, please contact us, and we'll be happy to go ahead and follow up with you individually to provide answers to questions or additional information that you might need. We want to thank you for your time and your attention, and certainly I hope the information presented here today at least gets you thinking about what needs to be done in establishing the policies that you want your employees to follow and those procedures that need to be in place to follow those policies. And hopefully this gives you some thoughts, certainly at the beginning of the year, so you can establish these things now, monitor them over the course of the next few months, and seeing how that has helped you improve the collection results that you're looking for. So were there any questions, Sharon? I didn't see any.
No, I don't see any at this time.
Very good. At this point, I want to thank everybody for their attention again, and thank you, Rose, for allowing us to present to the members of the association, and look forward to seeing everybody on the next webinar. Have a great day and stay warm.